Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week continues part 2 of my tour of the Inner Sphere with the completely impartial look at the vile and reprehensible Federated Suns and the noble and heroic Capellan Confederation. No, I'm not biased at all! So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the greatest rivalry in the Inner Sphere. The Federated Suns was founded by House Davion in 2317. Originally, there was multiple princes over each of the areas that would eventually become the marches, and these formed what was called the High Council. And they were all co-equal, with one of them being the first prince, the first among equals. Well, like all Davions, he chose to have a civil war, killed all but one of the other princes. The only one that survived was out in the way backfields and just stayed out of it. And from there, a reign of terror began. The Davions have ruled more or less with an iron fist since the beginning. Down the line, a Simon Davion would execute the Davion Parliament, the Federated Suns Parliament, because they disagreed with him. And doing so would cement the permanent place of House Davion as being in charge of the Federated Suns for all time. Of course, the Federated Suns Constitution has 6 liberties that all citizens are guaranteed. The right to personal liberty, the right to own property, to own weapons, to expect fair treatment, to privacy, and to participate in planetary government. And you know what? Some get fairer treatment than others. Like the nobles get a lot fairer treatment. And people with mechs get fairer treatment than those with tanks or just rifles. But hey, the Federated Suns has these guaranteed liberties. The office of the first prince is the leader of the Federated Suns and is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federated Suns. He must be at least 20 years old and have served at least 5 years in the military. Could be infantry, but most often they're mech warriors. And then he also has access to House Davion's personal wealth. And, well, let's just say House Davion owns a lot. At least a dozen worlds. Now, of course, the first prince can't do everything on his own. He has to have somebody to handle the day-to-day running of a vast interstellar empire. This generally falls to the planetary governors and the march lords. You see, the Federated Suns is divided into 3 marches. The Draconis March, which faces the Draconis Combine. The Capellan March, which faces the Capellan Confederation. And the Crucis March, which is the march that is at the center and around the capital of New Avalon. Once upon a time, there was the Sarna March when the Federated Suns was joined with the Lyran Commonwealth. But that kind of fell into the Chaos March after the split between the two. Now, Princess Regent Yvonne Steiner Davion would create a fourth march, the Periphery March, which is along the backside of the Federated Suns. It's the side facing the periphery. And, of course, Davion has a little area out in that basic area that's called the Davion Outback. It is a poorer area of Davion because, there aren't major threats coming from the periphery, so they don't need to send troops and such out there, so, hey, they don't need to spend the resources out there. This is an area prone to illiteracy, and even traveling schools haven't quite been able to solve that issue. It's an area that's poorer overall, and mostly based around agriculture. Because, of course, the Davions will treat farmers as people who need to be kept stupid. Of course, the first prince has his advisors, the Privy Council. The Privy Council doesn't really have much authority. It serves to advise the first prince. The prince's champion, the marshal of the armies, and the heads of the 8 military departments are all seated on the Privy Council, as is the president and an elected member of the High Council. And of course, the ministers in charge of the 8 ministries which oversee the governing of the Federated Suns also sit on the Privy Council. So basically, the Privy Council is like the cabinet with some additions. And it doesn't really have much authority. It can recommend military and government appointments. It oversees the running of the state bureaucracy. And the important power. Upon the death or retirement of the first prince, the Privy Council determines who becomes the next first prince. Now, of course, there is one more entity in the Federated Suns government. Another pointless entity, because all power descends from the first prince. And that is the High Council. Basically, they have a president who serves for life or until he's impeached by 3/4 of the council. And it can appoint representatives to foreign governments, approve treaties, and enact laws. But basically, basically the High Council is a rubber stamp for the Davions. And it even fails in that, being bogged down in its own parliamentary procedures. It does, however, act as a forum to debate policy and put forward recommendations and enact regulatory changes. Overall, the High Council doesn't serve much purpose. And the Federated Suns could go along completely without it. In fact, they probably have several times. And that is House Davion. Now, let's get to the really important house to talk about. The greatest house in the Inner Sphere, House Liao. The Capellan Confederation is the youngest of the interstellar states. It was founded in 2367 by Duke Franco Liao of the Duchy of Liao. And he made a radical proposal in the response to some House Davion peacekeeping in the area that was called the Capellan Zone. And that was to unify the entire Capellan Zone under a centralized authority and give this authority strength to resist foreign invasions. There was a lot of debate over this. I don't know why. It was a brilliant idea. But the Capellan Confederation was officially formed in July 2367. Now, their government is, of course, led by the Chancellor. The Chancellor is the celestial wisdom of the Capellan Confederation. He is responsible for all domestic and foreign policy, has the power to issue decrees, and can make legislative changes at will. He serves as the Commander-in-Chief of the Capellan Confederation Armed Forces and has personal control over the warrior houses and the Death Commandos. Once upon a time, the position was a 10-year term, but in 2480 it was turned to a lifetime appointment. And below the Chancellor is the Prefectorate, also called the Prefecture. It was initially created by Franco Liao as an advisory council, and its members are elected from the lower house, the House of Scions, for 10-year terms. Originally, there were only 6 members of the Prefectorate, but it grew to 12 under Kernath Liao, because he wanted to include some other powerful men and women than just this first 6. And its most important power is, upon the death of a sitting chancellor, they determine who the next chancellor is. Now, originally, this could have been any member of the Prefectorate. But when the Capellan Confederation joined the Star League decided more, to only grant members of House Liao a seat on the Star League High Council. And thus, House Liao became the only eligible candidates to become Chancellor. And, in 2598, Chancellor Qin Liao issued the Decree of Succession, stating that in the event of a failure to elect a new Chancellor after 3 formal votes, the Chancellorship would automatically be ceded to the most senior member of House Liao, and only if a member of House Liao was unavailable or not of age could the Prefectorate choose another in their place. Now, the Prefecture does still maintain its own sort of significant powers. It passes national tax legislation, appropriations for the armed forces, and officer appointments for those military units outside the Chancellor's direct control. It also arbitrates disputes between commonalities, and, if the Chancellor wills it, may issue decrees and rules on court decisions. It also can ennoble people, granting certain privileges and responsibilities to individuals within the Confederation. This is a sort of way to counteract decrees passed by the Chancellor. And of course, the most important thing is all legislation passed by the Prefectorate is inviolable, and the body cannot be removed or disbanded by the Chancellor. Obviously a reaction to when House Davion murdered their own Senate. Now, directly below the Prefectorate is the House of Scions. This is, of course, the scions of the noble families. And it was originally formed as a check on the power of the Chancellor and the Prefectorate. It is open to any nobles, though it has 12-year terms, and these are staggered, so there's a constant rollover in it, a constant changing of the guard. And the power of the House of Scions has ebbed and flowed. But the main powers it has is it has the right to appoint new members to the Prefectorate. It has the right to determine taxes for individual commonalities, separate from the national taxes determined by the prefecture. And any legislation passed by the House of Scions is inviolable. Now, of course, you have the ministry under this, because House Liao has always kind of had this rise and fall of tendencies towards mimicking the Han Chinese dynasties. And so bureaucracy is a huge thing for House Liao. And I'm not really going to go into all their different ministries. They're more like what you would expect. Ministry of Resources, Ministry of Information Standards, Ministry of Trade and Exchange, Ministry of Development, Ministry of Social Education, Ministry of the Military, and Ministry of Allied Relations. But there is something truly unique about the Capellan Confederation. In every other successor state, all you need to gain the rights and privileges of citizenship is to be born. In the Capellan Confederation, no. You have to earn citizenship. Now, you're born. You are technically a ward of the state under the provisional supervision of your parents. During this time that you are growing up, you receive a state-sponsored education and are encouraged to engage in activities for the betterment of your community. At age 15, every Capellan child gets evaluated. See if they've done enough to show enough commitment to the state by their participating with their community. Now, they can do this through outreach work or civic participation. And if you are found to have provided enough effort, you are granted citizenship. If not, you are given a grace period of 2 years to prepare and have a second evaluation. If you fail this evaluation, well, you're not a citizen, you're a servitor. you're going to get the menial work that is important to the operation of the Confederation, but doesn't have the prestige of, well, being your own person. And immigrants to the Confederation also have to earn their citizenship. Foreign nobles can simply pay a relocation fee. Other immigrants have to go a full educational cycle on the meaning of Capellan citizenship, and perform some service to the state. Typical several months of unpaid labor within their chosen profession before being accepted. Now, on a recently liberated world, all individuals are immediately made servitors and have to spend 5 years in that condition before they are given the opportunity to earn citizenship. The rights of the Capellan citizenship are many. It allows you to be a member of the caste system. It gives you free health care and education, retirement pensions, and so much more. Of course, it comes with responsibilities. You can be ordered to be relocated to another world if necessary, retrained to serve in a completely different industry, but the state pays for that. If you are not a member of the armed forces, you have to register with the local militia and serve in the event of invasion or natural disaster. And, of course, you must always continue providing for your community throughout your life. Now, I mentioned a bit further back that the Chancellor has direct control over the warrior houses and the death commandos. Let's touch on those. Essentially, the Capellan Confederation has 4 militaries. The Capellan Confederation Armed Forces, the Home Guard, which is the basic militia units that are the standard planetary militias that have their own actual heavy equipment like mechs and tanks and such. You have the Death Commandos, who are covert ops. They can pilot anything. Many of them are cross-trained in different types of vehicles and battle suits, etc. And then you have the warrior houses. These are special. These are, in fact, unique to the Confederation. The warrior houses find people young. Sometimes it's families sell their kids into them for the chance of a greater future. Sometimes they just find the right street urchins. Sometimes you have people born into the warrior houses. It doesn't matter where they came from. You start young in the warrior houses. And you're trained in infantry combat from as soon as you start. As you grow up into the warrior house, you will eventually get such privileges as learning how to pilot a battle suit, or pilot a tank, or pilot a mech, all based on your individual proclivities. But you are always part of the warrior house. Your loyalty was always to the Chancellor first. And each warrior house espouses its own different philosophies. But they're part of what makes the Capellan Confederation unique, because they take in even the unwanted and grant them a chance for great service to the glory of the Confederation. That's it for this week's discussion. Next week, I get to talk about House Merrick, or the Free Worlds League, and the Republic of the Sphere. Until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.